Please find your... Hello, welcome. This is panel 3 of the International Schiller Institute Conference. This panel is titled The LaRouche Oasis Plan, Driver for the LaRouche Program for 3 billion New Productive Jobs. And to start us off today, we have another musical offering. We have tenor John Segerson and pianist Dora June will perform 3 different compositions of the same poem titled Frühlingsliebe. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this. Or Faith in Spring. The poem itself was composed by Ludwig Uhland in 1812, a time of great hope for throwing off Napoleon's quest to subjugate all of Europe and Russia as well. The composers are Cordian Kreutzer, born in 1780, Franz Schubert, born in 1797, and Josephine Lang, born in 1815. Because these 3 songs constitute a unified conception of the same poem, please save your applause for the last of the 3.
An allen Enden, sie säusen und weben, sie schaffen an allen Enden. O frischer Duft, o neuer Klang, o frischer Duft, o neuer Klang. Nun, armes Herze, sei nicht bang, sei nicht bang, nun armes Herze, sei nicht bang. Nun muss ich alles wenden, nun muss ich alles wenden, alles wenden. Die Welt wird schöner mit jedem Tag, man weiß nicht, was noch werden mag. Die Welt wird schön mit jedem Tag, man weiß nicht, was noch werden mag. Sie blühen, will ich enden, das Blühen will ich enden, man weiß nicht, was noch werden mag. Es blüht das feste, tiefste Tal, es blüht das feste, tiefste Tal. Nun, armes Herz, vergisst der Qual, nun, armes Herz, vergisst der Qual. Nun muss ich alles wenden, nun muss ich alles wenden, alles wenden. frischer Duft und neuer Klang. Und neuer Klang. Nun, armes Herz, sei nicht bang. Nun muss sich alles wenden. Nun muss sich alles wenden. Die Welt wird schöner mit jedem Tag. Man weiß nicht, was noch werden mag. Das Blühen will nicht enden. Es will nicht enden. Es blüht das vertiefte Tal. Es blüht das tiefste Tal. Nun, armes Herz, vergiss der Qual. Nun muss sich alles wenden. Nun muss sich alles wenden. Säuseln und wehen Tag und Nacht. Sie schaffen an allen Enden. Sie schaffen an allen Enden. O frischer Duft, o neuer Klang, o neuer Klang. Nun, armes Herz, sei nicht bang, sei nicht bang. Nun muss sich alles wenden. Nun muss sich alles man weiß nicht, was noch werden mag, das Blühen will nicht enden, das Blühen will nicht enden, es blüht das fernste, tiefste Tal, das tiefste Tal. Nun, armes Herz, vergiss der Qual, vergiss der Qual. Nun muss sich alles, alles wenden. Nun muss sich alles, alles wenden. Nun muss sich alles, alles wenden.
Thank you so much, John Segerson and Dura June, for that beautiful offering for today's panel. And I want to emphasize why the Schiller Institute always starts each panel with a musical offering. And it's to put you in the correct mind space, especially after everything we've discussed today, the intensity of everything we've gone through, the beauty in the second panel, and now we're going into some of the nitty-gritty, where we're going to be discussing true economic power. And this is very much connected to being able to inspire every one of us to go out and do what needs to be done in what seems like an impossible task. So I want to encourage people, just my prerogative as moderator, Anastasia Battle, but also the editor of Leonora Magazine, which is the Schiller Institute's magazine with a recurring membership of $5 a month. You will get this delivered in your email, but we also have printed copies that you can purchase for single use. So I want to encourage everyone, if you've enjoyed this conference, please become a member of the Schiller Institute and dig into these really beautiful ideas. And thank you everyone for joining us for this thoughtful conversation and conference thus far. To start off this panel, we want to take a clip from Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, which is from one of my favorite webcasts from November of 2001 on economic value versus money.
I do not believe in monetary value. I believe in a assigned monetary assessment of value. But that is not mathematically interchangeable that value is physical. Monetary value is not physical. It's a conventional value, not an actual value. The actual value, you see, you have to go back to the question of what is an economy. Money has nothing to do with the real economy as such. That is, in terms of the essential value terms, money has nothing to do with real value. Money is a convention. It's a piece of workable fakery in terms of like promissory notes. And the promises are what they are, and the outcomes are not necessarily in accord with the promises. The value here lies in the rate. I've referred to this before. Let me picture it this way. What's involved here is, first of all, the increase of the productive powers of labor as measured in the level of population, of density and productive powers of labor of the population as a whole. That's value. This value is determined by a rate of growth, which is not necessarily a simple increase, but it's an increase in productive powers of labor. It's increase in productivity. That the idea of profit itself, as real profit as opposed to nominal profit, is located, is there an increase in the physical productive powers of labor, as measured per capita and per square kilometer? That's your fundamental measure. That's your measure of value. And it's a measure of value of development, not of a fixed value. There's no such thing as a fixed value of money. It does not have fixed value. If money sits there and is not invested, it deteriorates. If somehow the process becomes more productive, it suddenly appreciates. It has no intrinsic value. It's a convention we use in society in order to organize trade, or to organize trade and investment. That's all. Nothing wrong with that. But we have to keep it in its place. Don't make it a god. And the monetary ideas are the typical poison. So therefore, what we're talking about is the increase in the productive powers of labor. You've got two problems here. You have, let's take the planet, the biosphere, which includes the lithosphere. We're on this planet Earth. Now, are we increasing the potential population density for human beings on the planet Earth, or are we not? That's number one, estimate of value. Are we increasing the potential population density of this planet, of human beings? Are we? Or are we not? Value. What's that got to do with money? Nothing. Are we increasing man's power to increase this gain? Now we're touching upon what? Money. Came up earlier, we were discussing this thing about the China investment, the $1 trillion investment. If I take $1 trillion of Chinese claims against the US dollar, and if I sits there, it has one value, which is pretty much that of dung. If I say this same $1 million of credit, $1 trillion of credit, is going to be invested in a science driver program to transform the productive powers of labor throughout much of Asia, well, and you're getting a lot of growth of value. Then that $1 trillion is worth something, isn't it? So value is based on these kinds of considerations. There is no such thing as an intrinsic monetary valuation.
Thank you, Lyndon LaRouche, for forever having these ideas for us all to enjoy. Next, I want to bring in Harley Schlanger for the discussion. He's the vice chairman of the board of the Schiller Institute, and many of you probably recognize him from the daily update on the LaRouche organization. Please welcome Harley Schlanger.
Well, thank you, Anastasia. In the absence of a dramatic announcement by President Trump during his recent tour of the Middle East, and there had been some hope that he might endorse the establishment of a Palestinian state, Benjamin Netanyahu is proceeding with Operation Gideon's Chariots. His goal is to destroy the potential for establishing a Palestinian state by pursuing a final solution to the Palestinian problem through mass killing and destruction, to convince those who survive to leave, aided by silence from the West. Is there hope for an alternative to Netanyahu's genocidal plans? Lyndon LaRouche identified a solution to the Palestinian problem in 1975. In April of that year, he traveled to Baghdad, Iraq, for meetings to discuss a change in U.S. policy toward the Arab world and the developing sector in general. Among the topics, a March 12th proposal for a $35 billion fund financed by Arab oil revenues, presented at the 9th Arab Oil Conference in Dubai. Members of the LaRouche movement circulated this proposal, presenting it as a seed crystal for development of the poorest countries and for capital-intensive industrial and agricultural developments in the Middle East. LaRouche undertook an organizing drive to counter Henry Kissinger's petrodollar swindle, in which profits from the 1973-74 oil hoax were used to bail out the Anglo-American banks, in conjunction with International Monetary Fund directed austerity regimes to collect developing sector debt. LaRouche's proposal was integral to his plan to create an international development bank, to replace the IMF with a credit institution to fund investment in the real physical economy, that is, in capital goods, productivity-increasing industrial and agricultural programs, and modern infrastructure. Presented at a press conference in Bonn, West Germany on April 24, 1975, LaRouche's proposal provoked an enraged response from Henry Kissinger, who used his influence to suppress its circulation, while collaborating eventually with British intelligence networks to set up a Get LaRouche task force. The core idea of the IDB was to fund development projects centered around scientific and technological advances to accomplish, first, a massive increase in output and social productivity of agriculture. Second, industrial development utilizing the machine tool principle. And third, the modernization of infrastructure. His trip to Baghdad came during a period of increasing instability in Southwest Asia, following the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Among the events prior to his April meetings were the assassination of Saudi King Fahd in March and the beginning of the 17-year civil war in Lebanon in April. The IDB plan called for a creation of a credit system to provide long-term, low-interest credits to fund capital investment in projects for an area stretching from Syria to Afghanistan and from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. LaRouche wrote that his IDB proposal offered a way out for those seeking peace in the Middle East, as it would enable Israel and key Arab states to begin negotiations for economic cooperation to resolve the Palestinian question by realizing the intent of Pope Paul VI's encyclical Populorum Progressio, which declared, "Development is the new name for peace." For the rest of his life, LaRouche would work tirelessly to promote an economic policy which would provide mutual benefits for Israel and the Palestinians. He met with Jewish and Israeli leaders, such as Nachum Goldman from the World Jewish Congress and Abba Eban, with representatives of Arab governments and institutions, and with heads of state, including Indira Gandhi of India and Jose Lopez Portillo of Mexico. In August 1977, the influential Israel and Palestine newsletter published an article by LaRouche, A Future for the Middle East, in which he summarized his view that agreements in the area of economic cooperation must precede political agreement. He wrote, "There must be direct talks between Israel and the PLO, which center on an economic development package." Here's what he wrote. "Any other approach will fail, will be quickly degraded into farce and probable war. However, it is not mere material advantage in itself which provides the basis for peace. It is the fact that the commitment of the governments to realize high rates of scientific and technological progress fosters humanist outlooks." With this goal in mind, he developed what became known as his Oasis Plan, to address the problem of the severe shortage of fresh water in the region. The next speaker on this panel, Jason Ross, will present a detailed report on the Oasis Plan. The question I will take up now is, what prevented negotiations from occurring to address this? There were two factors, which I took up recently in an article published April 11th in the Executive Intelligence Review. Before there was the Iron Dome, there was the Iron Wall. First is how the Zionist movement was utilized by the British Empire as an instrument of imperial geopolitics, as part of its divide and conquer policy, extending the City of London's great game in Central Asia into Southwest Asia. And secondly, the adoption by the Zionists of a doctrine designed to give them control over what they called Greater Israel, even though the Jews were a distinct minority in the region. The Iron Wall of Zev Jabotinsky, a security doctrine which is still in effect to this day. What is the Iron Wall? Well, Jabotinsky wrote in 1923, "There has never been an indigenous inhabitant anywhere or at any time who has ever accepted the settlement of others in his country. Any native people views their country as their national home, of which they will always be the complete masters. They will not voluntarily allow not only a new master, but even a new partner. So it is for the Arabs." He continues, "Every indigenous people will resist alien settlers as long as they see any hope of ridding themselves of the danger of foreign settlement. That is what the Arabs in Palestine are doing, and what they will persist in doing as long as there remains a solitary spark of hope that they will be able to prevent the transformation of Palestine into the land of Israel." Now, the solution he proposes is the creation of what he calls an iron wall. Quote, "Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. This colonization can therefore continue and develop only under the protection of a force independent of the local population, an iron wall which the native population cannot break through. This is our policy toward the Arabs. To formulate it any other way would be hypocrisy. As long as there is a spark of hope that they can get rid of us, they will not sell these hopes. And when not a single breach is visible in the iron wall, will they come to us with proposals for mutual concessions." Now, this has been the strategic doctrine of Israel since 1948, when David Ben-Gurion adopted it during Israel's War of Independence, which the Arabs identify as the Nakba, or catastrophe, as 750,000 people were driven from their homes or killed. Following the 1967 war, it remained a policy for dealing with the Palestinians. A leading feature of this doctrine, in addition to the use of force as a deterrent, is no negotiations or dialogue are allowed. In August 1990, LaRouche intervened again, writing a peace plan in the true interests of Arabs and Israelis. After asserting that there is, quote, "no purely political solution," the reason for that is that without a policy of economic development, the Arabs and Israelis have no common basis for political agreement, no common interest. It is only as the Israeli, not as a Zionist, but as an Israeli, finds his or her interest to be the economic development of Israel as a nation, as a producer of vegetables, machine tools, technology, and so forth, and the Arabs similarly, that both have a fundamental common interest in the progressive development of the fertility and fecundity of the land of the entire region. On that basis, for the sake of those respective and common economic interests, a political settlement is possible. The Oslo Accord, which was the product of negotiations conducted secretly at first, between representatives of Yitzhak Rabin's government and Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, represented an opportunity to break from the Iron Wall policy. First, it included the idea of trading land seized in the 1967 war by Israel for peace, And secondly, it included 2 economic annexes as part of the treaty, which was signed at a ceremony at the White House on September 13, 1993. At that signing ceremony, Rabin famously offered a toast to, quote, "those with the courage to change axioms," unquote. Annex 3 set forth a protocol on Israeli-Palestinian cooperation in economic and development programs. The first area of cooperation was the field of water. Others were for cooperation in electricity production, energy, finance, transportation, trade, and industry. Annex 4 addressed cooperation in regional development programs. LaRouche's Oasis Plan provided both an outline and specific details on how to proceed, then and now, as its implementation would offer incentives to all nations in the region to achieve peace through economic development for mutual benefit. But it was sabotaged. Netanyahu personally intervened, creating a climate of hate against Rabin in Oslo, from which a settler extremist emerged and assassinated Rabin on November 4, 1995. It was further sabotaged by international financial institutions, which refused to release the funds allocated to begin the projects. 32 years have passed, years of an increasingly brutal occupation under the doctrine of the Iron Wall. Acclaimed historian Avi Shlaim reflected on this in an interview with Jacobin magazine in September 2020. Shlaim said the problem is that Israel's leaders fell in love with the Iron Wall. They fell in love with military power. As a result, they're relying on using military superiority to reach a settlement with the Palestinians. Netanyahu has never shown any interest in resolving the conflict through negotiations, he added. Since 1967, no Israeli government has ever intended to allow an independent Palestinian state. The one exception was the effort by Yitzhak Rabin with the Oslo Accords. The historical significance of Oslo, he said, is that Rabin was the first and only Israeli prime minister who in good faith went toward the Palestinians on the political front. None of his successors were serious about negotiations. Netanyahu, by family and political connections, built his career as a ruthless enforcer of the Iron Wall doctrine. His father was the American secretary for Jabotinsky. Today's Likud party is the successor to Jabotinsky's Herut party. In July 2023, Netanyahu expressed his adherence to this doctrine. Quote, 100 years after the Iron Wall was stamped in Jabotinsky's writings, we are continuing to successfully implement these principles, unquote. The murder of Palestinians and the destruction of Gaza today through Operation Gideon's Chariots are a legacy of the Iron Wall. It must be decisively repudiated by all citizens. It is time to tear down the Iron Wall and let the waters flow. I conclude with an insight from Lyndon LaRouche from his May 23, 1986 response to Shimon Peres's call for a Mideast Marshall Plan. In relations between Arab and Jew in the Middle East, we discern 2 opposing cultural movements among each. On the one side, there's the heritage of the Arab Renaissance. On the other side, the Sufism, which destroyed that Renaissance from within. Post-Hitler Judaism is of 2 general views. The one bases itself optimistically on 2,000 years of Jewish survival under the diaspora. The other takes Hitler's Holocaust pessimistically as its point of departure. The cultural basis for peace between Arab and Jew is the coherence of the impulses of the Arab Renaissance to the principles of 2,000 years of Jewish survival in Europe. The function of regional economic development is to unleash a cultural renaissance among both Arabs and Jews of the region, to establish the movement for stability within each nation, and to foster among the nations a common view of the dignity of the individual, such that the life of the person of each nation is sacred to all nations. Economic development by itself will not suffice to bring the desired renaissance into existence, but that renaissance cannot be effected without a basis in vigorous economic development. In concluding, I repeat, for peace, Tear down the iron wall and let the waters of the Oasis Plan flow. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley Schlanger, for that overview. Next, I'd like to bring to the discussion Jason Ross, who is the science advisor to the Schiller Institute and personally worked with Lyndon LaRouche on the basement scientific research team. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. So I'm going to build on Harley's discussion of LaRouche's method of economic development through the specific example of his Oasis Plan for Southwest Asia, a program to conquer the region's deserts instead of its people. Creativity is the basis of physical economy. In 1995, LaRouche wrote, "Each person is given the intellectual potential which no animal has, the power to not only imagine states of nature which have never before existed in the universe, but under certain restrictions to impose those ideas efficiently upon the universe generally. The condition to accomplish this is that that imagination is brought into accord with universal lawfulness. It is creativity so defined which represents the individual person's intellect cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect. By this means, one is able to recognize among one's own efficient forms of intellectual states a quality which is the reflected image of God." Let's talk about that. What does it mean for the individual person's intellect to be cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect, as LaRouche put it? Well, human creativity produces ideas. And if these ideas are valid, they resonate with the universe in such a way that our species can command new powers of nature to achieve new states of existence, new levels of productivity. If our ideas, if our mental concepts were not in coherence with fundamental physical causes, then our explosive population growth, our voyages to the moon and other bodies in the solar system, our improved lifespan and health, none of this would have been possible. Einstein expressed this pithily in this statement: "The eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility." I mean, it's a kind of a miracle, isn't it, that these things we have in our heads, these thoughts, are able to cause the outcomes that they are, to fundamentally transform our species' relationship to nature, to each other, and to that process of discovery. We are meant to comprehend the universe and to use that knowledge to improve our mastery over nature and our view of the human individual. But under the Malthusian paradigm, which is now dominating most transatlantic institutions, the relationship between human beings and nature is upside down, backwards. We are taught that human intervention into the natural world is inherently bad by violating some presumably ideal state of nature unsullied by human action. Under that outlook, our species is guilty until proven innocent. And the way to be innocent is to cease to exist. That's the green paradigm. So this green paradigm, it must be overcome to develop this region of the world, Southwest Asia, and to unshackle our species globally from the neo-colonial chains presenting themselves as environmentalism. The most important environment for human beings is not the natural environment. It's not the off-the-shelf environment. What environment do you interact with? The synthetic environment, our created environment, the nurturing environment that we have fostered, that through our improvements has increased our productivity, our standard of life. We interact with electrical grids, with water systems, with sidewalks, with roads, with hospitals, with museums, This is our synthetic environment. Start with that. A few examples of this. In the United States, the Tennessee Valley Authority eliminated the flooding risks of that region, provided for improved navigation on the rivers, created hydroelectricity to spur industrial development, and provided water for irrigation. It was transformational for the region, a synthetic environment. In China, the Three Gorges Dam has ended the periodic death and destruction that was caused formerly by flooding on the Yangtze River. Or think about transportation and our concept of distance. Unlike sea travel, land-based connectivity among nations allows for development along the entire path of travel. A rail line built through a region transforms the potential productivity of that entire region. A ship sailing on the ocean does not have that effect in the middle of the ocean. So high-speed rail, roads, power grids, water grids, sewer systems, subways, museums, hospitals, this is our platform on which our society flourishes. And the LaRouche World Land Bridge proposal, which today is well exemplified by China's Belt and Road Initiative, sees a network of development corridors stretching across the world. It's not only a program for growth, it is an explicit rejection of the anti-growth Malthusianism that we're awash in today. From such a standpoint, with such a policy, a peaceful and prosperous future for the Middle East were possible. LaRouche laid out that future 30 years ago. It is called the Oasis Plan.
Lyndon LaRouche laid it out 30 years ago. It is called the Oasis Plan. Immediately after the 1993 signing of the Oslo Accord in the White House by Israeli and Palestinian leaders, Lyndon LaRouche and his associates urged those parties and the international community to implement economic development projects to sustain, to advance the peace process. LaRouche and his associates developed the Oasis Plan, which included both certain economic aspects of Annex 4 of the 1993 Oslo Accord, which was called the Protocol on Israeli-Palestinian Cooperation Concerning Regional Development Programs. Plus, it called for additional crucial water, power, and other projects that LaRouche noted were needed in the mid-1970s. This plan, the Oasis Plan, focused primarily on addressing the greatest barrier to development in the region, the shortage of fresh water, through the construction of a network of desalination plants that could turn the plentiful seawater into fresh water. And these plants would not only be on the Mediterranean coast, they would be built along two new canals, one connecting the Red Sea with the Dead Sea, and another connecting it to the Mediterranean. To be clear, these new canals or aqueducts are not for cargo shipping, as an alternative to the Suez Canal. Their purpose is to transport water. Now, because of the low elevation of the Dead Sea, which is more than 400 meters below sea level, the flowing water could also provide hydropower, electricity along the way, which could help power the desalination plants and development more generally. The plants could also be powered by the large quantities of natural gas off the shores of Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. But most importantly, the Oasis Plan calls for going beyond hydropower and chemical fuels altogether, through the construction of nuclear power complexes along these canals and on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, to produce plentiful electricity and to desalinate seawater to green the vast deserts of the region and to power an industrialization process in Palestine, in Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. The use of nuclear power for energy would liberate the region's hydrocarbon resources to be used chemically to produce industrial materials through intermediate petrochemical products. The nuclear-powered complexes could use inherently safe, pebble-bed, high-temperature gas-cooled reactors of the type just brought into operation in Shidao Bay, China. The new man-made rivers created by desalination will tremendously expand the potential for agricultural and industrial development across the region, making the deserts and the economies bloom. LaRouche explained the necessity of developing new sources of water in a 1994 speech. LaRouche. One cannot meet the indices of water consumption for a modern population, for both the Palestinian and Israeli populations, under present conditions. There is a conflict over water because the Israelis have, frankly, been using their conquests to take water from everybody. It's one of the conflicts with Syria on the Golan Heights issue. It involves in Lebanon the Litani River and things of that sort. So the power and water development have to be accompanied by a network of transportation infrastructure, upgrading the physical connectivity between all the nations of the region, turning a region of conflict, a barrier to connectivity, into a hub of interaction, into a crossroads. A highway connecting the West Bank with the Gaza Strip, linking the Palestinian state, is an absolutely essential feature of this network. Regional highways and rail networks will allow the entire area to operate from a higher economic platform. LaRouche also proposed an expansion of the Suez Canal, with industrial zones to be built on both sides, a task that has been accomplished by Egypt in recent years. LaRouche argued since 1975 that this region, which is the crossroads of civilization and located geographically between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, and between Europe, Asia, and Africa, that it has a unique position as an industrial and logistics hub. Oil and natural gas will be feedstocks for industrial production of plastics, paints, many other useful materials, rather than being exported as a raw material to be used primarily for simple combustion. The upgrading of connectivity to enable higher levels of development has been a key feature of the 2013 China-proposed Belt and Road Initiative. Using this region as a land bridge between continents, with the major powers like the US, China, Russia, and the EU contributing to its development, will stabilize the area and, along the way, help cement the better relations among the superpowers that will have been necessary to bring it into being. Scientific, technological, and cultural cooperation and exchanges are key elements in the transformative process the Oasis Plan represents. By cooperating to fight the desert, rather than each other, the people of the region will better be able to recognize the humanity in each other, the common capability of human beings to discover principles of nature and to transform our relationship to the environment around us. There are no human animals.
All right. So the deserts of the region cry out for development. And this plan, it is not some distant aspiration. It's not a pipe dream of what we might do years in the future after peace is achieved. It is only through an international paradigm of relations among countries supporting this approach, as discussed in the first panel today, that peace would even be possible. Every minute, the genocide continues, brings more death, more bitterness, more difficulty in achieving shared prosperity. It must end. And the geopolitical paradigm, which is the source of most conflict in the world today, must be replaced with a new security and development architecture, and that on a global scale. This is not a regional issue. Now, although it is challenging to imagine a lasting, meaningful peace between Israelis and Palestinians, we can look to a meaningful historical precedent of the 30 Years' War, which drowned Europe in blood, spilled in Protestants killing Catholics, Catholics killing Protestants, in a spiral of revenge that left some regions with less than a third of their pre-war population. Politically, borders and territories were astonishingly fragmented. Imagine working out a peace arrangement in this kind of environment, right? So how was this conflict resolved? In 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia brought an end to the decades of warfare, ended the 30 Years' War. How? By looking towards the future, to an interest in the benefit of the other and the principle of forgiveness. Article 1 of the Treaty of Westphalia includes this text: "A Christian, general, and permanent peace, and true and honest friendship must rule. And this peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. A neighborliness should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship, and flourish again. Article 2 says, on both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the troubles, no matter how or where, from one side or the other, happened in terms of hostility, so that neither because of that, nor for any other reason or pretext, should anyone commit or allow to happen any hostility, unfriendliness, difficulty, or obstacle in respect to persons, their status, goods, or security itself, or through others, secretly or openly, directly or indirectly, under the pretense of the authority of the law, or by way of violence within the empire, or anywhere outside of it, and any earlier contradictory treaties should not stand against this. Instead, the fact that each and every one, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard for persons or outcomes. All this should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one could demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity. It wasn't easy to reach this arrangement, but the magnitude of the concept conveyed in this treaty, I think, points to the kind of thinking that made the resolution of this horrible religious warfare a possibility. This Westphalian principle has explicitly been under attack by such Malthusians as the City of London's Tony Blair, who announced in 1999, in a speech, I think, in Chicago, that the era of Westphalia was over. We're in a new era. So how is reconciliation in Southwest Asia possible? LaRouche wrote in 1978 in his A Machiavellian Solution for Israel, the only human thing is to give the lives and suffering of the dead meaning, not merely by establishing peace in the Middle East, but by establishing the basis for peace, which gives fulfillment to the lives of the present and future generations of the Palestinians and other Arabs, and thus purpose and fulfillment to the sacred lives of the dead. This, of course, applies to Israelis as well. Tens of thousands of people are already confirmed dead. No doubt tens of thousands more of those reported missing have perished as well. Hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, will carry the scars, mental and physical, imposed by the State of Israel. The question to us is, how can we give meaning to the lives of those who have perished, to those who have suffered? Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for that very powerful speech. It definitely, I think it hits everybody very hard when you're thinking about how we're going to deal with this crisis right now, and I think you hit it very well. So thank you for that. I'd like to bring in a presentation from Sergei Glazyev. The next presentation was made back in 2001 by Dr. Sergei Glazyev of Russia, and it remains totally relevant to our deliberations today. We will see excerpts from an address he delivered on May 4th, 2001, at a conference of the Schiller Institute held in Bad Schwalbach, Germany. At the time, Dr. Glazyev, one of Russia's foremost economists, was chairman of the Economic Policy Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, and a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Today, he is State Secretary of the Russia-Belarus Union State, and Academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The title of his remarks is Reconstruction After the Financial Crash.
First of all, I'd like to greet Mr. LaRouche and Schiller Institute for such an interesting and productive conference. I think that it is a very important event which is taking place just in time before the financial system collapse, and we still have some maybe months or so to think about the future and to think what could be done in order to overcome those bottlenecks and dangers which could appear in the nearest future. For me, it is a great pleasure and honor to participate in this conference and to share some ideas on those subjects which Mr. LaRouche raised in his brilliant presentation. I'd concentrate on regularities which determines the modern economic development, which we must take into consideration thinking about the nearest future and about the actions which could be implemented to overcome the worldwide catastrophe and to find the way out from those crises which Mr. LaRouche described. Mr. LaRouche showed that we are facing the crisis of global financial system and the present global economic order. But how this crisis change the global system? Whether the globalization process stops or it will find the new forms, or perhaps the world economy will collapse in some regions which will try to find out their own way from the chaos, or the world oligarchy will find the new opportunities to create the new global order based on horror, terrorism, or worldwide dictatorship. What could happen? In order to answer all these questions, I think we shall take into account some important features of the present globalization process. So, as Mr. LaRouche showed in his speech and in his papers, such kind of economic order inevitably should collapse for obvious reasons which leads to the collapse of any kind of financial pyramid, which we see not only in Russian experience, but also in the financial crisis in Asia recently, before financial crisis in Mexico, and so forth. I do not have time to speak about experience of various countries which trying to find their way in this difficult situation. But I am sure that each country could contribute in this. And in Russia, we also have discussion what will be the further economic policy. Either we shall continue to the policy which already caused crash of the Russian economy, continue to the Washington consensus policy without any active role of the government, the policy of self-destruction of the government, and in this case, the Russian economy will collapse together with the worldwide financial crisis, or we shall find the way out, trying to find our own opportunities to propose other nations to participate in mutually beneficial programs, including those which Mr. LaRouche mentioned in his very interesting description of the Eurasian corridor developments, and so forth. I fully support those ideas which Mr. LaRouche said in his speech about the necessity to develop worldwide infrastructure based on the new technologies. It should include not only the new transportation infrastructure, it should include also, of course, the information infrastructure, telecommunications, research and development institutions which should work on the worldwide level. It should include the worldwide social infrastructure also. I think that we should, the world, at least the leading nations, should come to the common responsibility of about the supply of the basic food, of water, of heat, and so forth to the population of the whole world, doesn't matter where the people lives. As far as we are speaking about the new economic order, we should think, I think, about the new architecture of the world organizations, which must have their own opportunities to work at the worldwide level according to their task force. If we come to the situation when the worldwide money creation center appears, it means that together with it, the worldwide credit facilities appears as well. It is very difficult to speak about the cheap credits for the whole world for different countries if you do not have the world financial system. So if we come to the situation when the world currency is establishing, it means that the world organization, which will be in charge of this currency, which should be under the control of the nations which organize this mechanism, also have opportunity to create cheap credits to all over the world. Of course, such kind of ideas couldn't be implemented immediately. I think it is the step-by-step process. But in any case, we should think about the creation of the international investment opportunities, which will be controlled by the nations, but which will be based on their own economic activity. For instance, we could think about the worldwide tax on the transnational corporations. We could think about the worldwide tax on the currency speculations, and to use this taxation, at least of the speculative operations, in order to finance those infrastructure projects which are necessary for the whole mankind. In order to not only to think about all these opportunities, but to implement them, we need the political will. And I hope that this conference will contribute to this. I totally agree with Mr. LaRouche that Russia could play, and perhaps would play, the very important role in establishment that this new world architecture. But unfortunately, the Russian president is not among the participants in our conference. So we have a lot of problems in all the countries. And I hope that this conference will help us to solve these problems and to find the way out from the financial catastrophe. Well, I'll try to be brief because Professor Menshkov already mentioned about these issues in Russian-American relations that under the Mr. Yeltsin presidency, his beloved foreign minister usually treat China as an enemy. But it was not taken seriously at that time, both by industrial managers and those who made foreign economic policy. And it is not the case now, of course. At the moment, we have a huge growth of cooperation with China. The Russian companies are actively participating in construction some new plants in high-tech industry in China, especially in aircrafts and in nuclear energy. We are thinking about the large-scale infrastructural projects in natural gas delivery to China and oil. A lot of Chinese working in Russia at the moment in Far East. We have a huge growth of economic activity coming from Chinese. And the trade is growing on. So it is quite obvious that the mutual opportunities for collaboration in various branches of industry are quite good. And what is lacking of course, is the finance. Unfortunately, the Russia still continue trade in dollars. China is trading in dollars, and we need dollars to finance our bilateral trade, which of course creates additional bottlenecks and additional transaction costs. So what is necessary to develop further this cooperation is create good financial instruments. And so we should speak about maybe the trade in the national currencies, in using some kind of payments mechanisms in national currencies to overcome the barter trade or the trade in dollars. And also what is very what is very important for the economic growth in the whole region of Eastern Asia is, of course, I think we should think about the some kind of international monetary organizations, which will help to find credit facilities for large-scale international infrastructural projects, which are discussed for a long period, but unfortunately are not implemented as we want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Sergei Glazyev. Next, I'd like to bring in for the discussion one of the longstanding member of the LaRouche movement, Mr. Paul Gallagher, who's the economics co-editor of the Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome, Paul Gallagher. Oh, that doesn't look like Paul. There we go. Oh, we can't hear you, Paul. One moment. Try again.
The emergence of the BRICS nations, followed by the election of an American president, ostensibly the dominant adversary, competitor, challenger of those BRICS countries, has created a condition of extraordinary rates of change in the economic relations among nations. There are potential conflicts among them erupting. There are new potentials for economic cooperation. It's a situation wherein the physical economics of Lyndon LaRouche and the interventions of this association with LaRouche's economic policies can and really must have a rapid impact. The imperative LaRouche policy of creating national banks in the United States and other developed nations, chartered to issue large loans and credits for industrialization and infrastructure, is staring the Trump administration in the face. It wants to overcome China's clear lead in manufacturing and industrial technologies, and it is needed to cooperate in credit for development projects in third countries. The reconstruction of Palestinian territories and Southwest Asia with an Oasis Plan is the most urgent example of the need for development credit. But America has no national credit institution, no national bank for modern infrastructure and industrialization projects. It has instead Wall Street's Federal Reserve Bank, which refuses all lending to engineers and builders and research firms, to cities or states, to projects, to industry or agriculture. The Fed lends only to megabanks to give them excess reserves, which they don't lend either. America's industrial economy has stagnated in the era of Federal Reserve dominance, quantitative easing, and zero interest rates since the 07-08 crash. American GDP growth during the Federal Reserve's take charge decade of 2009 to 18 averaged just 2.2% per year. It was only the biggest banks that grew by some 40% in deposits and assets. China's GDP over 2009 to 18 averaged 8% per year. In that decade, when the Federal Reserve took charge here, it was China that emerged as the world's leading economy in purchasing power GDP as well as manufacturing. When the Federal Reserve's money printing finally lurched into a 2023 interest rate spike of more than 5%, China's annual GDP growth continued to double that of the United States. It became the world's largest economy on a purchasing power parity basis, the world's largest manufacturer and merchandise trader. It is also impossible to miss the fact that the sudden, astonishing doubling of America's national debt in less than 5.5 years began with the Federal Reserve's frantic money printing response to the interbank lending crisis, or repo crisis, of September 2019. At that time, central bankers at the Jackson Hole, Wyoming annual Federal Reserve Conference had called for regime change, meaning bringing fiscal policy under central bank control. The Fed has supported the Treasury's fantastic debt binge since, while conducting its own. With the Federal Reserve clearly dominating monetary and even fiscal policy since the financial crash, the lack of credit for America's physical economy has been obvious. There is the long-term stagnation in the productivity of American manufacturing. It's shown here in the first slide on a Federal Reserve blog site. It undermines President Trump's strategy of competing with China in modern and innovative manufacturing and new technologies. And at the same time, it holds up cooperation and development of third countries. This disappearance of manufacturing productivity is not the result of trade with China. It results from the Federal Reserve policy since the global financial crash. Non-residential construction spending, one measure of the ability to work on major infrastructure projects, is $200 billion per year below what it was in 2007. And as for the housing market, despite the Federal Reserve buying up more than $2 trillion in mortgage derivatives, that is mortgage-backed securities, supposed to back this market up, it is paralyzed with home sales at levels of more than 30 years ago. Underlying these physical phenomena, there is the disappearance of loan growth in the entire U.S. banking system, while deposit growth has boomed in the same banking system. This is shown in what I call figure 2 here. The blue line for deposits, continuing its rise, is the Federal Reserve stuffing electronic, no, I'm sorry, that's not figure 2, is the Federal Reserve stuffing electronic excess reserves into the biggest megabanks. JP Morgan's loan to deposit ratio was above 85% until the first decade of this century, for example, but only about 60% in the second decade. But these deposits do feed the megabanks' in-house hedge funds, their prime brokerage funds, their own trading desks, to backstop pure short-term speculations. Thus, no lending results. And the Federal Reserve outrageously will also pay the megabanks interest on the reserves they're not using, in the recent period near 5%. Here in the third figure is more detail up through the end of 2021. And, well, that's actually figure 2, but it shows the same thing. And as of just 10 days ago, the gap in the banking system between deposits and loans and leases was still $6 trillion, 17 trillion in deposits with 11 trillion in loans or leases. What did the megabanks do with all those added deposits in order to avoid lending them to the real sectors of the U.S. economy? Well, in 2024, the 6 largest Wall Street banks alone had more than $3 trillion placed in hedge funds. Just 3 giant banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan Chase, had put nearly $2 trillion from those reserves into 3,400 different hedge funds. These megabanks became the prime brokers for those 3,400 prime speculators. If you add in similar investments of other prime speculators like money market mutual funds, one has accounted for more than 4 trillion of that missing unloaned $6 to $7 trillion in new deposits. This brings up the Glass-Steagall Act. What the Wall Street megabanks have done with all these deposits is exactly what the Glass-Steagall Act prohibited them from doing while it was in full force for nearly 60 years, namely supporting securities broker dealing and speculation. The Federal Reserve has provided the huge mass of new deposits. The repeal of Glass-Steagall licensed and incentivized the banks not to make them into economic credit. So learn the lesson. The US President and Congress should stop sparring with the Federal Reserve Board while that board provides no credit of any kind to the United States real economy or economic infrastructure and fools around with speculative short-term interest rates and so-called inflation targeting. The executive in Congress can instead nationalize the Federal Reserve itself, create a national bank for infrastructure and manufacturing within the New York Federal Reserve Bank, give it a new board selected from among industrialists, business bankers, and engineers, give it a charter which requires it to be the lender of last resort for high technology infrastructure development projects and reindustrialization. Lyndon LaRouche proposed and described this policy since 1991. In an article for Executive Intelligence Review in January, I've outlined how the Federal Reserve Bank can be remandated to cease functioning as a reserve bank for Wall Street giants and made into a credit institution for the nation's capital budget, and to stimulate capital goods exports for economic development. The Fed's mortgage derivatives holdings have to be sold off. Interest payments on excess reserves have to be ceased. And as it sells its still huge holdings of Treasury securities, it should be offering buyers the option of trading the Treasury notes and bonds for equity capital in the new national bank. This will tend to reduce the total of U.S. Treasury debt outstanding. But most important is that the new bank commence credit operations with productive companies in the United States and abroad, and loan discounting operations with commercial banks and infrastructure operating authorities of the United States, and cooperatively with those of other nations. The operation of a national bank enables the Treasury to issue credit and new currency, but to do so through the Treasury's own commercial lending bank. It therefore lets the nation have a capital budget for new infrastructure and industrial technology separate from the nation's budget for recurring payments. America's national banks, the banks of the United States in the 19th century, directly provided the driving force of bank lending in the American economy, leveraging national credit by discounting the loans of private commercial banks. The Second Bank of the United States, for example, directly provided 20% of all bank lending in the United States economy, and in addition, invested in the stock of companies projecting canals, roads, and the first American railroads in the 1820s and 30s, when states and territories were first becoming interconnected. Then the Treasury could issue bonds to borrow from the public, place the funds in the Second Bank of the United States, along with the revenues of tariffs, taxes, and land sales, and that bank was consistently and safely able to lend and invest 2 to 3 times the reserves the Treasury provided. That meant a national capital budget funded through a national bank is more powerful than simply lending what the Treasury collects or borrows. The Second National Bank directly paid the salaries and benefits of government employees, the debts of the nation, the operations of the post office, Navy shipbuilding, and many other expenses, but at the same time leveraged its holding of government revenues to make productive contract loans and discount private banks' loans. This was the nation's capital budget. In the process, the notes of the Second National Bank became America's first uniform and flexible national paper currency. It was a characteristic of the American system that the Second National Bank was governed for 15 years by a man who had never directed or worked in a bank. Nicholas Biddle was a leading classical Greek scholar, an expert geographer, a scientific farmer, and a Pennsylvania legislator. Biddle's only experience with banking had been in writing in 1811 a defense of a national bank, which had been widely circulated and studied. Biddle in turn prepared that publication by studying the works of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. I recommend that those taking part in this conference do the same. Restoring the principle of national banking by nationalizing the Federal Reserve Bank will give the United States the capacity to issue productive credit for great projects in America and to help rebuild abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul Gallagher. I think we're going to enjoy the creation of the Third National Bank. Okay, so next for the discussion, we have William DeOreo, a civil engineer here in the United States. Please welcome DeOreo.
Good day, everyone. I'm Bill DeOreo. I'm speaking to you from Boulder, Colorado. And I just wanted to quickly go over some work we did in Jordan. And it's a good example of how applying technology that is basically available on the shelf could make a huge impact on improving people's lives. There's no technical reason this can't be done. It's more a question of politics and will. The person who's the inspiration for this conference, Friedrich Schiller, he quoted in a book he wrote called The Education of Man. He said that man defines himself by his deeds. And what kind of image of man do we see in the mirror of our present times? And Schiller was writing around the time of the French Revolution. He was one of the generation of philosophers that were reacting against the excesses of the French Revolution, because you remember the whole idea of the Enlightenment was that human beings could create a perfect society simply by virtue of human reason. And, fortunately, this neglected all the other passions that go on in the human head. Reason certainly is one, but there's all of the passions like fear and lust and rage and anger, greed, envy, you name it. Be that as may, when we look around today, given from our experience from the 19th and 20th century, certainly bear out Schiller's concerns, that when we look at what societies have done and are doing, it gives us pause to think, is it possible that we can redeem this situation? Let's just hope that we can. Now, one person who in the 20th century, Alvin Weinberg, was a nuclear engineer. He actually started as a biologist. They developed. He was the inventor of the conventional boiling water reactor, and he said this. He said, "Now I had become obsessed with the idea that humankind's whole future depended on the breeder reactor." He means the thorium breeder reactor. For society generally to achieve and maintain a living standard in today's developed countries depends on the availability of a relatively cheap and inexhaustible source of energy. And that same situation exists today. And I'll show you what I mean from Jordan's case. Using nuclear energy to generate electricity and water was kind of the brainchild of that generation of scientists and physicists. In the Middle East, we know that revolutions and wars are linked to resources and economic shortages. Now, in Dara, Syria, I don't know if you remember that during the reign of Bashar al-Assad, there was a revolution started in Dara, where a group of unemployed family that had basically been thrown off their farm because the irrigation wells had been shut down. They basically began a revolt in Dara against the regime, and it led to that entire, all that civil unrest during the Obama administration. Again, if those people could have stayed on their farms and grown vegetables, they would have been happy, but they couldn't do it because there wasn't the water. Kingdom of Jordan, in 2016, when we did this study, it was 11 million people. A big percentage of these were refugees. The population was much larger than they had been anticipated and way exceeded its carrying capacity in terms of water or power. In 2016, we did a demand study in which we showed even with demand management, the demand was going to rise up to, it started out about 500 million cubic meters of water and go from 500 to about 1,000. It's going to double between 2000 in a 25-year period. Unfortunately, the supply was going to peak out in 2025, coincidentally the year that we're doing this seminar, and start declining. So Jordan was and is in a water and energy crisis. Here is this is a multiple effect thermal desalinator. It's a brilliant device in which if it's fed steam, waste steam from a power plant, right? And you put seawater in, steam in, apply a vacuum on here, and bingo, you get fresh water out the bottom, and the brine, which goes back to the Gulf of Aqaba. Incidentally, that's what here's Jordan up here. Here's Amman. Their only access to water is right here, the Gulf of Aqaba, down here, the Red Sea. So they could build a power facility, a water and power facility down at Aqaba, and it's about 300 kilometers. They could build a pipeline up to Amman and feed Amman and feed agricultural production along the way. But it requires a very efficient, reliable energy source. Here is a multiple. This is a schematic of a nuclear reactor that runs off of thorium, and Weinberg called this the holy grail of nuclear power. Basically, it has the whole central portion of the reactor is full of a molten salt at about 700 degrees centigrade, and the salt is thorium has been dissolved in this salt, and then there's a second core, again the same salt, except it's enriched here with uranium-233, and when it goes through the graphite core of the reactor, a nuclear reaction occurs, giving off heat and neutrons. The neutrons are absorbed by the thorium blanket, and when thorium absorbs a neutron, it becomes converted uranium-233, which is what the reactor is running on, and then this can be chemically separated in a separate system, and the uranium-233 can then be returned back to the system. And so the whole system runs just on thorium, and all you feed it is thorium. You don't bring in, there's no fissionable material brought in after the reactor gets started, and nothing leaves. The only thing that leaves are the fission byproducts, which are, many of them are very valuable for medical or industrial purposes, and heat. And the heat used to drive the electrical generation and to desalinate the water. It's a clever system. Here's a typical 24-hour day load curve for electricity. And so what you would do is run the nuclear reactor at the optimum power output all 24 hours a day, and when the electricity demand drops, you take more steam and make more water with it. So it becomes the two systems work together over the day to generate water and electricity, and the whole thing is running, just kept going at this optimum power output. Molten salt reactors they operate at high temperatures. They do not use water for cooling, so they're low pressure. That makes them passively safe. And then the only water that's required, this is important for Jordan, they don't use water for cooling, so the only water that's required is makeup water for the boilers. And so that's great. So it makes it an ideal situation in a dry area. So in the 1970s, the thorium breeder reactor was, they had operated a test reactor in the 60s at Oak Ridge, but it was canceled because they wanted to go with a reactor that generated, you name it, plutonium for military purposes. And that's the whole thing. It gets back to Schiller. We're locked in I mean, the default reaction of most governments is preparation for wars. If we had developed this technology, it would be available right now, and it would reduce the need for war, right? Again, so the desire to they canceled the thorium reactor. They tried to build this fast breeder reactor. It never quite worked. That was canceled after years of work. It never went into production, and so now we're left really with nothing. We have the standard boiling water reactors, which are not bad, but they're the same thing. They have all the limitations of solid fuel, high pressure reactors. One bright spot is the Chinese government. The United States gave China all the IP from Oak Ridge on these molten salt reactors, and the Chinese thought they were great, and they took it all back to China, and they have a working. They just started up like a small thorium-fueled molten salt reactor in China, and so they've got one working. So bully for the Chinese. And so the technology is still out there. We can still get it back. There's companies as I said, there are companies in the U.S. that are working on this. And so what we really need to do is develop the political will to get the government to set up a program where we commercialize these reactors it could start with military bases or what have you, but we need some jump starts from the government, and this is where these conferences are coming so handy. So thanks very much, and I hope I got your attention a little bit. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Bill DeOreo. Next, I'd like to go to Bob Baker of the Schiller Institute Agriculture Commission. Please welcome Bob.
Thank you very much. It's been a very exciting day when you think about everything we covered here with the music, with the discussions of economics, with what Paul went through about the Federal Reserve, and it really comes into a focus now. We all got to eat. So in the world today, I'd like to start by thanking Helga and everyone here that helped put this conference together. It's very important. In the world today, it has a very serious underproduction of food. And this goes right along with the recolonization of agriculture in North America and Europe over the past 75 years, and the enforcement of underproduction elsewhere, which the global majority is now shaking off. When we look at the world, what should we be producing? With 8 billion people in the world, we should be producing around 4 billion tons of grain each year. That's enough for 1/3 to 1/2 ton per person per year for direct consumption and indirect consumption through the animal protein chain. But we don't even produce 3 billion per year. Where are the grain harvests increasing? Well, look at wheat. 3 nations, China, India, and Russia, have increased their combined wheat output by over 12% in just 7 years, when the rest of the world increased it barely 8%. And this is a signal. What are these nations doing to increase wheat and other crops? Well, they're intervening in both horizontal and vertical ways. Horizontal meaning trying to expand the land area, and vertical meaning to increase output per existing unit of area. And this calls for better seeds, timely water, fertility. We got to have more power, infrastructure, and the types of things. Now let's look at what China did with infrastructure. And remember what Lynn said about the economy. It's not money, it's physical. And remember what Scott Ritter said, that dialogue is very important. And when you have physical infrastructure, you have to have a lot of dialogue. So China built the South to North Water Transfer Project. It's about 900 miles. It brings water to the dry North wheatlands. It was finished in 2014, the central route. Here is the start of the conveyance system. Let's go to Russia. Here are grain storage silos on they call it the New Land Grain Corridor in the heart of Eurasia. It runs along the Trans-Siberian Rail Route from Russia's Black Earth Belt to China. The corridor will store and move over 30 million tons of wheat and other grain by 2032. President Putin and President Xi commissioned this in 2012. Let's look at Afghanistan. In Central Eurasia, Afghanistan is building this channel, 177 miles long, the Kush-Tepe Canal. It's nearly half finished. 500,000 acres of wheat will be created. Afghanistan will become food self-sufficient again. Now let's look at a satellite photo of the desert and farmland. Now Egypt is in the immediate neighborhood of Gaza. Egypt is converting desert to farmland west of the Nile Delta, and they are bringing water to what's called the New Delta Project, and it's working. This photo shows desert on the left near Alexandria, and this was in 2018, and this shows how the same desert has been turned into farmland. You see those little circular areas down there? Those are center pivot irrigation, and so they're growing wheat now in 2024. Water has transformed this. Egypt has built the world's biggest wastewater treatment plant near Alexandria. It opened last year, which is channeling water into this agriculture. Now, these are examples that show what was called the American system for manufacturing and agriculture and is now being applied to Eurasia and Egypt. Now, let's go back to North America. There is no American system here at the present. There is the British system. There has been no building of water or other infrastructure for decades. No support for family farms. Family farms, thousands, have been ruined. Agriculture has been recolonized. Let's look at a couple charts. The number of dairy herds has gone way down. The number of ranches has gone way down. Pig farms. We now have the smallest cattle herd in 70 years, and we're importing 20% of the beef we consume and 70% of the lamb that we consume from Australia. So the farmers were told to get big or get out. There's a farm in Canada, in British Columbia, that has 350,000 acres. That's called getting big. Now, if you look at this chart, you'll see the blue line in the middle shows the number of farms going down. The top line shows how the acreage on each farm, average acreage, is going up. And the bottom flat line shows how we have slowly reduced the total amount of farmland we have available. So what's causing this? Well, it's pricing. Because as Paul pointed out, when you get the Federal Reserve and you get rid of the Bretton Woods system and you float the dollar, all of a sudden you're not focused on physical production, you're focused on speculation. And what you see here, this is, as you can see, indexed to 100, but the parity pricing, which means farmers being able to cover their costs of production, has gone down. It was ended in the 1970s, and today's prices to the farmer are barely 30% of parity. Parity is the price that you need to cover all your expenses. That's the next slide. And all public interest regulations against speculation was ended in 1999 with the repeal of Glass-Steagall and then the 2001 Commodities Futures Modernization Act. So let's look at how that's affected the farmer's income. If you want to farm, you better plan on having 1 or 2 jobs minimally, if not more, on the side to cover your losses. There are people that advise farmers today, and young farmers in particular, and they emphasize, don't plan on farming without a second income. And so the cartels have enforced global sourcing of food to the extreme. And since 2000, over 60% of U.S. consumption of fresh fruits are imported. 35% of vegetables in the U.S. are imported. Mexico, where corn originated, has been forced to be dependent on corn imports from the U.S. All this is for the colonizer cartels to make money coming and going on both imports and exports. When you add the tariff wars on top of this globalization, you have a huge mess. On top of that, the U.S. Agriculture and White House have launched what they call World, quote, Market Access Campaign, another name for the old British East India Company system. Top U.S. officials are telling India and Peru and Japan and the United Kingdom and other target nations, they have to import food from the U.S. or else. When Vice President Vance went to India with that message, the Indian farmers hit the streets. They burned him in effigy. And now the U.S. Agriculture Secretary Rollins went to Britain this month and said, you have to import U.S. beef and basically screw the British farmers. In the meantime, the U.S. farmers are already getting screwed. The cattlemen, like we just discussed, and importing sheep. The cartels are importing beef into the U.S. from Australia, Canada, Brazil, and even Namibia, Africa, one of the poorest nations in the world. So what do we need to do? Take these kinds of actions. 1, let's break up the cartels with antitrust, the monopolies, the British East India type systems. Let's build up agriculture productivity in all nations. Let's reinstate Glass-Steagall, banking. Let's put a curb on speculation. Let's restore parity prices and steady income to the farm family so they can make a living farming. Let's produce credit and provide it for operating and capital improvements on the farm. Let's build infrastructure, water, disaster defenses, transport, and more power. Let's back manufacturing. Let's promote more science and culture. And as we saw this afternoon with the music, we could put a little more culture in agriculture. So another way to put it is we need 1 million new family farms. Everyone must eat. Get the food to Gaza. Let's get 1 million new family farms. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to introduce the next 3 farm leaders that are going to speak. I'm going to introduce them all now, and then they will make their presentations. First is Joe Maxwell. He's from the state of Missouri. He's the co-founder and leader of the national farm group, Farm Action, which has a very great database. He was lieutenant governor of Missouri and a state legislator for 14 years, and he is a lifelong farmer and served in the Army Reserve. He is a strong voice for the U.S. and farmers everywhere against the globalists. The second person after him is Mike Callicrate. He's from the state of Colorado. He raises cattle in Kansas and operates Ranch Foods Direct, which he set up as a model on what the new family farmers could do to market their own meat direct. And that's in Colorado. He is well known for being a policy fighter for years in the western states cattle country, and he is the conscience for agriculture and the food supply for the U.S. and every nation. And he was a rodeo star. The third message will come from Alberto Vizcarra. He's a rancher associated from Mexico with the National Front to Save the Mexican Countryside. And this group was formed a couple years ago with activist farmers and ranchers from 5 states. We will now listen to their presentations. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for allowing me to be on this program. I'm Joe Maxwell. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Farm Action and President of Farm Action Fund. In the United States, consumers firmly believe they live in the greatest country in all the world. They have so many options to choose from in the marketplace. Almost every automobile brand is on the car dealer lots. Computer stores are full of options, and the grocery store shelves are lined with brand after brand just for the taking. But on the food aisle, it's all an illusion painted by a handful of monopoly corporations with the market power to dictate who farms, what they farm, and who gets to eat. The U.S. agriculture and food system is almost certainly a corporatocracy. Let me show you a few slides to illustrate this point. These are the top 4 meatpacking companies. I chose the meatpacking industry just to kind of give you an example because 4 companies control over 80%, almost 85% of the market. Tyson Foods, Cargill are U.S. based, JBS and National Beef are Brazilian based. So we have transnational corporations dominating the grocery store, and the consumers think that they have choices. But as you can see from these slides, there's not really a choice. There's 4 companies, and they get to dictate what you're eating and what's on your table. This control over food and agriculture sector is not only in the food aisles, it's not only in the meatpacking industry. This slide represents the concentration that exists throughout the agricultural and food sectors. Cottonseed, 90%, beef processing, as I mentioned, 85%, nitrogen, 82%, soybean crushing, 80%, wheat milling, 63%. These companies not only control the inputs, but they also control the grain trading and the processing of our food. Last fall, we published a report titled Kings Over Necessaries of Life, Monopolization and Elimination of Competition in America's Agriculture System. I'm sorry that our website is only published in English. However, to read the report and to learn more about the control of the dominant firms in the U.S. food and agriculture sector, you can go to farmaction.us Agriculture Consolidation Data Hub and learn more about what's going on in the United States. President Trump and the United States Department of Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins doesn't seem like they're going to change this dynamic in the U.S. under their watch. As an example, Elon Musk Doge, supported by the Secretary, made severe cuts to the USDA. Most of these cuts were to programs that assisted small and mid-sized farms while rolling out over $10 billion to the largest farms. They cut $1 billion in local small farm food purchasing for schools and food banks and moved that money to the largest egg companies in the United States who'd already made billions of dollars off of record profits from overpricing eggs, all based on the avian flu. We have much work to do in the United States if we are to restore our economic freedom. I want to thank Helga again and the Schiller Institute for providing us this great opportunity.
Hi, this is Mike Callicrate, St. Francis, Kansas, and I want to thank Helga and the Schiller Institute for this opportunity to present today. I see agriculture as almost a war reparation type of a project. Because of the globalization, the monopolization of our food system, we've lost family farmers and ranchers, the true stewards of the land, and the husbandmen of our livestock. And I think we really have to approach this globally, really, as how are we going to rebuild local regional food systems? And you can tell by the graphics that I've provided just how much soil that we've lost in my area of the country, from Colorado Springs to St. Francis, Kansas, my path each week back and forth. I look at the land and the amount of deterioration, and we've got to come up with a plan to fix that. And I think the way we fix it is we restore livestock back to the land, livestock, cows that eat grass, that fertilize the soil, and sort of in a circular economy, we start to rebuild the soil at the same time we rebuild those lives of the people who take care of our livestock and rebuild the communities as well. In Washington, D.C., inscribed above the main portico of the USDA building, there is a quote by St. Paul, and it goes, "The husbandman that laboreth must be the first partaker of the fruits." Now, I don't think too many people in USDA over the last 50 years that I've been farming and ranching have paid attention to that quote. In fact, on a trip to USDA in DC a few years back, I asked people in the building where that quote was, and they'd never heard of it. And so I made sure before I left that they did know where it was, but I'm not sure it's made any kind of an impact on our USDA people. So I want to see more attention paid to rebuilding our food system. What can we do policy-wise to rebuild local regional food infrastructure? How do we support that? It doesn't do us any good to build it if we don't support it. I say direct all government purchasing from the school board to the city council to state and federal government. Any purchases that they have influence over should be prioritized to the local regional food infrastructure that we as citizens build together in this sort of reparation or rebuilding process after the monopolization is devastated our ability to feed ourselves. We're now a net importer of food. From a food security perspective, that is extremely dangerous and troubling, and something that we've got to address immediately. And so go back to a sort of a type of agriculture rather than the industrial model, one that's circular, one that keeps those dollars created from the wealth generation of agriculture in the communities is that produce it, put people back on the land, and let's make sure our kids want to come back. Let's make sure kids have a bright future in agriculture going forward. So thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Nacional por el Rescate del Campo Mexicano apoya la idea.
On behalf of the National Front to Save the Mexican Countryside, we greet the Schiller Institute's International Conference being held this May 24th, 25th. We support the idea that the nations of the world join forces, inspired by a beautiful vision for humanity in times of great turbulence. This purpose would be out of reach if we fail to solve the world's food problem, since nearly 3 billion of the planet's inhabitants do not enjoy adequate food supply and more than 800 million suffer from hunger. Going hungry or dying of hunger is not a choice that people make. It is the result of the imposition of economic policies that detest people and define them as a burden the planet has to carry, favoring instead financial speculation based on food shortages. Let us celebrate the disintegration of the NAFTA and USMCA free trade accords, but it is up to Mexican and North American agricultural producers to be the catalysts of a new economic and trade relationship that will be an example of relations between the countries of the North and the South to produce the meat, milk, eggs, and bread that mankind needs. Let us replace the pernicious axiom of so-called comparative advantage that has governed the relationship between Mexico and the United States for the last 4 decades. Let us define common purposes and launch great water infrastructure projects such as Nahuapa in the United States and the Plino and Pligon in Mexico, and manage their large volumes of water to greatly expand the agricultural frontier and change the ecological characteristics of the entire region, bringing life to the shared expanse of the great American desert.
Thank you very much. It's always wonderful to hear from actual working farmers and their views of how to resolve many of these crises that we're facing. These truly are people that are committed to feeding humanity and honestly care about the well-being of humanity. So thank you again, farmers, for all that you're doing. So we are going to have time for some discussion and Q&A. Actually, I think we have Harley Schlanger on and Mike Callicrate. We have Jason Ross and Bob Baker. I want to see from the panelists that we have on so far. Oh, I also see that we have DeOreo on and also Paul Gallagher. Wonderful. All right. Well, I want to see from the panelists if anyone has a response to anything that's been said thus far. Maybe we can go to Harley first if you have any thoughts.
Well, I think this discussion has been very useful in especially bringing up this question of the role of agriculture. Lynn has often discussed the idea that from agricultural development, you have technological advance, you have the development of modern agriculture, machinery that relates to machine tool production, and also you need to have a population that's healthy, that's fed. Now, this gets to the question of the topic of the panel, which is peace. How do you achieve a peaceful resolution unless you have an economic policy? You know, if you look at what's happening now with the Palestinians, how does it bring peace by starving the population, starving those who are not killed by bombs? Now, this is an obvious point. The potential for the region is great. There's a population that needs work, that's educable. And what the problem is a credit policy. And this is why Lynn always comes back to this economic question and why he was so insistent on replacing the international financial institutions that exist for the sake of speculators and debt collectors, but not for production. And so the idea of the Oasis Plan that Jason presented is that if you have the credit, you can immediately put people to work doing things that are necessary, not just in agriculture, but in all the spin-offs. Because if you have the power generation connected to it, you have the capacity for cheap power. We in Europe now know that because of the stupidity of the policy toward Russia, we don't have adequate electricity, adequate power, and we're going through a deindustrialization. So the solution is in this question of a credit policy that puts the interests of people first, of sovereign nations ahead of international banks. And I'll just add one final point on this. The policy was already spelled out in terms of a broader conception, the Oslo Accord. And what Lynn did is provide the specifics of how that could be done. And the great crime was the fact that you had those who used the argument that you have to get a political solution first. You have to get peace first before you can have economic policy. It doesn't work. And I think that's quite clear. And that if you have credit, not for bailouts and not for speculation, but for physical goods production, then you have the basis for peace. And so I think that it's quite important for people to think about this. You know, we're not just here to say farmers are great. What's great about agriculture is that people need to eat. And it's an important part of an overall full set economic policy that is the basis for mutual cooperation. So I just wanted to add that point.
Thank you, Harley, for that. I wanted to see, Paul, if you had a response to anything said thus far. Oh, you're muted, Paul, or at least we can't hear you.
And that was because I was muted. Thank you. I think that is what characterizes many of the things we're talking about as distantly improbable as they may seem at the moment to cause the kind of changes in policy all of a sudden that we're talking about. We are going through a period of real shocks, and there are, I think, more coming in the debt markets for the national debts of some of the major powers, such as Japan, the United States, perhaps not to mention the European country beginning with an I, but other countries as well, major countries. We're going to see explosions in their debt markets, which are going to add to the shocks which are already occurring because of the policies, the new policies of the American administration. So I think we have to be aware that we're in a period where, like the poem that John was singing at the beginning was alles wenden. Everything has to change.
No, I think that's very true. I wanted to see, Jason, if you had a response to anything said thus far.
No, I'd be happy to. I'd like to hear some questions.
Okay. What's that? Oh, it looks like Mike has something that he wants to say.
No, I didn't have anything to say quite yet, other than since you called upon me, just to give you an idea of just how far we are from seeing the change that Paul just mentioned. JBS has just been allowed to list their stock on the New York Stock Exchange. This is a major. This is the biggest meat packer in the world, but also one of the world's leading criminals. I mean, from bribery to just outright theft to child labor. I mean, what else can they possibly do to be worse? And in supporting what Joe had said about Secretary Rollins and President Trump, it really doesn't look like they've got a different system in mind than the one that's failed us. And then you look at the $5 million that JBS contributed to the inauguration fund for President Trump. So yeah, we got a long way to go, and if people have to be hungry to get their attention, we may not be far off from that. So thanks.
Right. And then DeOreo. Do we still have you on? There we go.
I'd just like to point out that today there was the President Trump signed some executive orders that included a lot more activity on nuclear energy. I haven't read I don't know all the details. And I know that even President Biden was fairly positive on nuclear energy. So there's a lot of work being done. And so there is some hopeful outlook on this. And you have to remember that the element thorium, number 90 on the periodic table, is almost a providential element. It's 4 times more abundant than uranium, and every atom of thorium can be put into a reactor without requiring enrichment. Enrichment is a very nasty business, and we can operate it on it. And I imagine the Kingdom of Jordan has got millions of tons of this stuff lying in the sand, and we need to get with the program. And I feel confident that we're probably within a few years of really making a breakthrough on this. So this conference is great. If everyone will contact your legislators and really advocate for it, we can really make a difference. So thank you very much. It was a great to participate. I'm honored to participate in this conference. So thank you.
No, it's been great thus far. So I want to open it up to the discussion with the audience.
Could I just say one more thing, Anastasia?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to go back to what Paul was saying and this question of the potential for this. If you look around the world, the worst situation is in the so-called advanced sector, because you have governments that are unpopular, governments that are screwing up. They're deindustrializing, they're not producing enough food, and they're at odds with the rest of the world. And what we're seeing from the global south is countries that are making an effort to leap into a modern condition. And it's an opportunity. This is what Helga keeps emphasizing, an opportunity for dramatic changes. You know, if you just think about what happened in 1989 and 92, you had a dramatic shift overnight. No one thought the East German government was going to collapse. And yet people went out and marched and demonstrated, and it changed. The opportunity was there. So I think what's important is for the people who are watching this to realize that what we've just presented are an outline of programs that LaRouche had put on the table going back 30, 40, 50 years. And the political will wasn't there. People in the West were satisfied. They were apathetic. Now they're becoming pessimistic. We have to have, and that's the importance of the cultural question, we have to inject into that population a sense of the immediate need for change can be met by an actual change. And what's going to require that, or what's going to determine that, is the people, the average person. And that's something that's been missing. And that's the importance of this conference, is to give people a sense that the change can occur if you're ready for it and if you're willing to do it. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Harley. All right, well, we have a few people who are lining up for questions. We got about 20 or so minutes. Oh, my phone died, so something about 20 minutes. So first I see Jose Vega over at the mic. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, oh, wow. First, I wanted to thank all of the speakers and the presenters, not just for this panel, but for all the panels. It's been a long day. It's a little exhausting, but I'm happy I'm here. I actually wanted to ask Paul Gallagher something about the original Oasis Plan of 1975 and Lynn's use of the idea of controlled thermonuclear reactions as the basis of a 15-year crash building of nuclear power. And I just want to read the exact quote where I got this from, where Lynn says, as if necessary for global development, the developing nations exploit their petroleum, natural gas, coal, and mineral raw material resources to the extent required for industrial expansion in both the industrialized and developing sectors. How shall we determine both the price of those resources and the compensation for the implied depletion of such assets? And then he continues, without a, quote, brute force commitment to the development of controlled thermonuclear reactions, or CTR technology, there is no price level or forward depletion compensation which could be considered equitable. So what was the basis for this and the commitment to CTR-oriented technology by 1985, 1990? And how rapidly could these thorium breeder reactors be built?
Paul? Oh, you're muted again. Paul, you're muted. We can't hear you.
That happens.
Sorry, that's a difficult question to answer directly, but taking it more from an overview, Lynn, a essential part of his energy, the energetics of his population density, potential population density studies, was that the emergence of a future platform of the most basic technology, for example, the most basic technology in this case being that of the production of energy generally, the emergence of the vision and the potential reality of a future platform, in this case, fusion energy, accelerates the utilization and also using up of the raw materials from the previous energy platforms in this case, so that you're actually getting a more rapid degree of development in the existing technological mode of development because of the increasing visibility, technological visibility of a breakthrough to a new one. And for the countries involved with the previous platform, that means more rapid development, right? Lynn was still talking about this in his trip to the United Arab Emirates, where he made at the Zayed Center there, where he made that very important speech in, pretty sure it was 2001, which you could almost say has outlined the policy that the UAE and to a certain extent Saudi Arabia, sort of following the UAE, has pursued ever since in terms of breaking through with the extraordinary use of their petrochemical resources, breaking through to primarily petrochemical uses and to nuclear power. And this is also involved in the strategy in terms of Israel. Will Israel tolerate those countries developing nuclear power, which is a real question for them, because Israel has bombed the nuclear power plants of a few other countries in the same region in order to prevent that. So, but this was what Lynn had in mind as a basic idea of the relationship between rapid technological progress and more rapid development with the preceding means of technological application to the one which was being developed, in this case, fusion energy. So I think maybe that's the best way to answer it. And otherwise, I just keep thinking of this amazing 7 or 8 words from Einstein that Jason quoted before, which I think is relevant to your question also. The eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility.
Thank you.
All right, I saw there was a couple other people who were standing in line as well.
Number 2.
What? They got tickets, okay. Hey, Martin.
Hello, this is Neil. My question is a statement for Bob and the farmers. Bob, I really appreciated on how you showed the irrational trade that the United States of America is conducting. I like the segment about how you were showing how different countries were banking on Mother Earth. This is a Henry Carey term. When Henry Carey said mankind is able to bank on Mother Earth, that's showing humanity's creativity, and free traders and communists, socialists, they would never say Earth is a great bank. And the last statement goes to the wonderful Mexican farmers who do not believe in comparative advantage. It had me smiling. Thank you very much.
Bob's pointing to see if Mike has a response.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thinking about banking on Mother Earth, that's interesting that we would think that. I mean, when you consider that all wealth comes from the soil, essentially, and we've allowed that soil to blow away and wash away and become non-existent on a lot of land, and so it's going to be imperative that we turn this thing around and get back to a regenerative approach rather than this extractive mining approach that's gone on since corporations have been in control. So, thank you.
Bob, looks like Bob's got a response too.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I'd like to focus on what we talked about earlier, about 1 million new family farms. Now, that's like unheard of. That's like, you know, most people's first impulse is, well, that sounds pretty good, but you know that'll never happen. Well, but the other side of it is, what if we continue the current policy we're on, where will we end up? Because we've now got a handful of monopolies, like, you know, we went through, that control 85% of the beef and our food. They're big international companies. And we got the biggest financial blowout in history happening. Now, we know what happened when COVID hit. All of a sudden, companies were shutting down. Livestock was getting slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands, and there wasn't anybody there. But you see, that is what the monopoly process has set us up to be, and that's why, you know, when you study just a little bit about the British East India Company, especially what they did to India, who, before they got there, was one of the most developed, industrial, beautiful countries, and they went in with a whole maze of corporate structures of people that didn't know how to produce and looted all the people that had the skills to produce, to the point where they became, you know, peasants, or they just were destroyed. That's where U.S. agriculture is right now. That's where European agriculture is right now. And that's why what Paul discussed, and we've discussed about getting a credit system to offset this controlled banking system that is only there for one reason: to put in motion economic systems that reduce the population of the world. And that's why they're always financing wars. But to put in 1 million new family farms, we used to have, like we got 1.8 million now, we used to have close to 7 million. And they had horses and buggies. So So the point is the mega agricultural and industrial operations, they're not by accident, they're by design to create the conditions for a breakdown and a collapse that will absolutely cripple the, especially in agriculture, food, and at the same time accommodate, you know, Lynn says war isn't going to reduce the population like the oligarchy wants, it's going to take starvation. And that's where the ideas that Henry Carey talks about and the idea of, you know, production is the real economy. That's why that is such an important thing. So it's a concept to consider when you think about 1 million new family farms. Physical production, because probably the best place you could ever have, the most dense area of training for creativity is a family farm. So let's get another 1 million of them and spin that all out into the whole economy. It's just an idea to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob and Mike. Next question.
Number 3.
Hi.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rafid Al-Jabouri. I'm the chairman of a political organization called Integrity Political Action Committee. Just give you a little bit of background. We're a new organization. We're trying to basically support candidates like Jose Vega, stand behind them, and build a grassroots movement to make a meaningful change into the political system as it stands. It is not a secret that the country is trending down on every front almost, whether it's agricultural, energy, manufacturing. We became more consuming nation than producing nation. And that is a fact given the numbers that we have from the GDP and how much we import, how much we export. In the last 2-3 decades, as far as I know, there hasn't been really major change in policy, whether domestically or even on the foreign policy front, as our representatives and senators, really they are not representing the people, in my opinion, and they are not responsive to the constituents. I myself tried to reach out to my representatives and senator for the issue of Palestine, for instance. They were unresponsive. And speaking of food, since we have the food on the topic, I just want to remind everybody there are 2.2 million people in Gaza who are on the verge of a famine. They are living in famine, actually, and there are unfortunate casualties or deaths as a result of malnutrition. I mean, given all these facts and the excessive spending of the United States on wars and army bases around the globe, and we're not seeing any results coming, whether we elect Republican or Democrat. Do the panel, the wonderful panel, agree or disagree that it is time, it has been actually, it is overdue, time to change the political status quo by electing people who truly represent the people, neither Democrat nor Republicans? And how do we reach the American public and convince them to break from party lines?
It's a good question. And I'd like to actually go to Harley or Jason, whoever wants to grab that first.
Well, let me start on that. Look, this is why LaRouche ran for president a number of times, and why the idea of building a movement around economic policy is a key. Let me get right to the core of things. What the last questioner brought up, what I brought up before, there is deliberate starvation being carried out in Israel by the Zionists against the Palestinians, against children, against women. And we're beginning to see a stirring against that on some of the campuses in the United States, even in Israel now, there's a change. But what is it we're really fighting? And this is come up around what Paul brought up about the credit system, about banking. We're fighting what was called synarchy, or corporate cartels running governments. And this is really fascism. I mean, you talk about reduction of population, that's what we're fighting. And we saw it now just in bold relief with the Europeans refusing to go to Moscow to celebrate the victory over the Nazis 80 years ago, and instead marching together with the Bandera fascists in Ukraine. So we've got to get serious about this political fight. Now, I think most of you in the US can see this. There is unhappiness. The initial euphoria around Trump is starting to wear down because he's still surrounded by the corporate cartels, by the neoconservatives and others, the Zionist lobby. But that's not the people. And this is where the program that we're presenting, it should be compelling for people, that they can march behind it, join it, figure it out, and become part of this fight. But I think what's most urgent is to realize this is the moment of change. We're at the tipping point where either we're going to lose humanity or we're going to have an uprising. And the uprising can't be chaotic. It has to be organized around this kind of program.
Thank you, Harley. Jason, would you like to?
Well, you said it. I mean, the U.S. is, we could list the problems for quite some time, I think. We've got, in fact, I'll list a few of them. We got the bizarre trade situation. We've got the, war on education, of Trump having a real vendetta against Harvard on the unlikely claim that it is a hotbed of dangerous anti-Semitism. We've got Lysenko running the HHS. We've got Doge bragging about cutting the budget while we have Trump announcing huge military spending and a tax cut. So it's a huge mess. The issue with politicians is on what basis do they determine policy? So you had mentioned Jose and his campaign. I think what Jose stands for is great. I think the way that and the social process by which Jose figures out what he would like to do is the key factor in that. So as a civilization, or as a country, as a society, what is the basis by which we arrive at our political views? What kind of discussions take place in the community about Alexander Hamilton, national banking, infrastructure? How can that become a more common feature of American social life?
Thank you. Next question.
Who is number 4? Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for Bob, Joe, or Mike. Either one can answer it. I think it's on the issue that I'm from Maine, and I'm facing the phenomena up there of the death of the traditional family farm, just as you pointed out. And I'm seeing kind of a response, which is the Joel Salatin phenomenon. He's getting a lot of attention because of his marketing techniques of like regenerative agriculture, high density food, and basically low debt levels because it's basically low energy. So is this a legitimate thing that we can entry level for people who want to be farming, who want to try it out? Or is this just, you might say, a populist reaction to this cartelization? So,
Bob or Mike, you want to respond?
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, Mike, you're muted. Nope, can't hear you. Try one more time, my friend. Nope.
I don't show I'm muted.
There we go. We can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Good.
There we
Okay.
go.
Yeah, what you're talking about with a lot of I call it the homesteading movement, like what Joel Salatin might describe. But one of the things that frustrates me among a lot of the regenerative people and others that are talking about some new approaches to agriculture, going back to that sort of family farm model, is they've been unwilling to accept or to talk about the fact that we don't have a market. And so if you go out there and you put all your family savings into a little homestead operation in hopes that you're going to be able to sell what you produce and make a living, it's just not going to happen. I mean, farmers markets don't work for farmers, and particularly don't work for more of the mid-sized farmers. And so I think what we have to do is we've got to develop the marketplace. And this is where I talk about the maker-owned marketplace. It's kind of like a public market, except it's actually owned by the makers that are in that market. And we learned that ownership of real estate and facilities was really important during COVID, because the folks who were paying rent saw a huge increase at the same time as in the restaurant world, their seats emptied out. And we just lost so many really good independent businesses, but they were taken out by the rent collector. And so we've got to develop these marketplaces, and we've got to get the government policy to where they actually support the local regional food system that really gives us the resilience and the dependability and the sustainability of a dependable food system. And so what we need these homesteaders to do and the new farms to do, and people who invest in them, is to get extremely aggressive on making sure that we've got predator control amongst the monopoly players. We have got to restrain them. We've got to make them stop rigging the markets and deceiving us and labeling and just the predatory practices.
Part of that, because I do talk to them occasionally, and when I bring up issues like parity, which is an obvious policy initiative that goes back to Franklin Roosevelt and Wallace, they're completely clueless. What, parity?
Well, what's that, Bob? Bob wants to say something, and then we're going to continue on because we could take one more question, and then we're going to go to closing.
Anyway, I'll just make a comment because, see, part of what has to be involved in this thinking about whoever's producing the food, even a smaller farm, is you got to have the credit system. Lynn's 4 economic laws. You got to control that credit system, and you got to put in big teeth into the antitrust operation, because you got monopolies here. We fought a revolution to get rid of that stuff, and we got to bust it up. And so when you have farms that get the right price, they're going to have a parity-oriented pricing system, and that's got to be the one guy walking down the road, and the other one right beside him is antitrust that's going after these monopolies, because it's like the old British East India Company, and they got a goal to reduce the population of the world. So that's what I would comment.
Thanks, Bob. Actually, we have, I was just informed that Alberto's on the line, and we're going to pull him up. He also has a response. Do we have you there, Alberto?
Hola, sí, me escucho.
I can hear you.
Hola, me escucho.
Go ahead.
Bueno.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Ok. Solo para reconocer.
I would just like to acknowledge the effort of this panel on the food issue and the coincidence that both Mexico and the United States face the same agro-financial enemy. I was talking to the Chihuahua producers day before yesterday, and they were telling me that in El in El Paso, the producers with whom they are in touch, they feel that this would be a good place for a meeting of American and Mexican producers now that the free trade agreement with Mexico is being discussed and redefined. I think we could define extremely important issues for the future relationships between Mexico and the United States on agricultural and ideological issues on a much better level than what the American and Mexican governments are saying right now. This is the proposal of the Mexican farmers.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for hopping on, Alberto. I want to go to one last question, and then we're going to go to closing for the panelists. So we have another question? Yeah.
Wow, this was a great discussion this afternoon because we're right there right now in the country. And so many comments, so much I want to say. But so this is to Mike, this is to Alberto. And what you just offered is the Mexican and American farmers coming together. Not with the megalithic, maniacal overlords, but the people, we the people, bottoms up. What I'm suggesting is somebody mentioned, I think it was possibly Joe or Mike, mentioned something about like how are we going to get this to market. Here's what every mother, grandmother, I'm a systems health educator all my life with health, okay? Men who have very big awareness would understand what would really undo the whole thing is just you start with non-GMO seed and you don't use glyphosate because even other countries in the world won't eat the food in this country, okay, as much. There's statistics on that because of how much we've been tortured in this country because we're not educated to that, or we don't want to be. And so here's the thing, we need a big education about what GMO does, that type of unfriendly GMOing, what it does to our lives. My God, talk about the earth. The people need a life. It starts with having a good body, mental state, heart opening, feeling good, hormones, all of that. And our children and the future. And I feel that if the American farmers come together with all that, so my question to you guys is, in the regenerative farming that you're talking about, are you talking about starting with good, whole, healthy, clean seed and not dirty seed for the human body? That's my question.
Well, Mike or Bob or Alberto, you have a quick response?
Hello? Can you hear me?
You're muted, Mike.
I'm not muted.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
So yeah, the day the Supreme Court decided that it was okay to patent life, Clarence Thomas led that and wrote the opinion, and that's after having worked for Monsanto. He wrote the opinion that made the GMO seeds that they were selling and made them very rich over it. But you've got to throw it all out. You've got to go back to the traditional varieties of seeds. You've got to go back to good farming practices. You've got to get rid of the glyphosate. And boy, you're going to get some big pushback there because a lot of these farmers, I don't even see them as farmers anymore. They're spray rig and tractor drivers. And they farm 10, 20, 30,000 acres and they can't do it without GMO seeds and these big spray rigs that spray the glyphosate and other chemicals. And so those guys, I don't know how many of them would come back into a more sustainable family farm model of agriculture that was diversified and really produced healthy and good food. But absolutely any model that we create going forward has got to be that model that realizes that soil health means human health. And we've got a huge barriers to overcome. It's going to take government policy. Only government policy can match the power of monopoly. And that's really where we are. And there's a lot of us that have been trying to go more direct to the consumer and bypass that monopoly power. But just like right now in the way of meat, in meat processing, we've lost our ground beef business to cheap imports, big meat packer, waste fat, pink slime blends that are, half the cost of what it takes to produce a good, healthy pound of ground beef. And so it's gonna take a lot of work to get the rules, the policies, and the regulations in line to where it really supports what's good instead of what's bad.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, could you just pull up the panel?
Could I give a quick one? I'm number 6.
No, I'm sorry. We're after 10. I'm really sorry.
Oh, it's 6. Oh.
It's after 10 o'clock. I think everybody's pretty tired and wants to get out of here soon. So we pull up the panel and we're going to go into closing. Okay, DeOreo, I know we didn't get a question for you. Why don't you take a couple minutes? I'm sorry, not DeOreo. DeOreo, take a couple minutes. Throw in some reflections from the discussion today.
Well, it was a great conference, and again, I just want to emphasize that we don't face a technical problem. We face a political problem. They had working thorium reactors at Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the 60s, and they were canceled because the government chose they wanted the plutonium to build atomic weapons. And so that's why the people attending this conference have got to realize that they need to reach out and dialogue, that's that great word, dialogue with their representatives and business people and their city governments to try to encourage them to advance this technology. Don't hold out for fusion reactors. Fusion is extraordinarily difficult. Fission is so simple, it's like falling off a chair. So great conference, and let's hope that in the next 5 years, we have really seen a breakthrough in this technology, and we can use oil. The idea of burning oil to make electricity is like washing your dishes with champagne. It's just a horrible waste, and I hope we can get beyond that really soon. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, DeOreo. Although I think people here might argue that fusion definitely is necessary to fight for, although we should also have
it's necessary, but it's maybe 50 years away. It's a very difficult technology.
No, it is some ways away, but definitely should
fight dreaming.
For it. Right. No,
Start
but
with
thank
the
you so
easy
much.
stuff, and we can bridge over, and if we can ever get fusion reactors to work, great.
Great. Okay. Mike Callicrate?
Yeah, man, I've learned a lot here. It was great to hear the presenters, and particularly Bill DeLario's presentation brought some real understanding. I'm just hoping that we can elevate all of these issues to where we get past the politics. We do have to win at that political level, because Bill is absolutely right. The barriers are political. So I just say to people when they start realizing what a mess things are is, let's just go home and make our communities as good as we can make them, and help each other, lift each other, and become as self-sufficient as we can in our own communities. So thanks a lot. Appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Bob, you want to say something?
Well, it's quite a discussion to end up with the food production after what we saw throughout the day. We started out with presidents of nations. We started out with ambassadors and high-level officials from the United Nations, and we went through discussions of finance and all the types of things that the LaRouche organization and Mr. LaRouche and Helga have really brought these types of events together to address. And that's very important in terms of expanding this and getting this kind of discussion into the layers of law, where we've got to change the policies and really get people self-conscious about you cannot continue with this policy because it is a deliberate policy to reduce the population of the world, dumb down the population. That's why we need the classical education and the classical music, and to put the culture back into agriculture. Thank you.
Jason.
All right.
Well, I do want to address a few of the things that came up in the Q&A as well. On the Roundup issue, where farmers essentially spray a poison, well, for plants a poison. I think it's harms to humans. It is possible to over-sensationalize its harms to humans. But you spread this poison and then you make sure that your plants are immune to it. That's one way to do it. What other technologies are going to come into the future? Are we going to have laser weed zapping, for example?
We already do.
You know, and then you take care of that. So the example of cooperation to make something impossible occur applies to the Oasis Plan. The way that this could become a reality, imagine how it would change the situation if the US has to change quite a bit, but if the US and China together said, we want to back up this project, we want to be involved in the engineering and the financing. Another example of that, on the Congo River, you know, huge flow of water. There is a site sort of near the coast where the hydroelectric potential is absolutely enormous. 42 gigawatts, 42,000 megawatts. That's a project that it's unrealistic to imagine that happening any other way in the present world than the US and China cooperating on it. So the potential for improving US relations with China, with Russia, by cooperating in third countries, I think is a very important part of moving the world into a better paradigm for international relations. I just want to say I really like Bill DeOreo's comment on burning oil being like washing dishes with champagne. Think about wood. I mean, what do we do with wood now? We make things out of it. We make furniture, we make houses, we make paper. The idea of just burning it seems totally antiquated at this point. When we make metals, we don't turn wood into charcoal. We use coal and turn it into coke to make our metals. So in the not too distant future, people will look back and say, they were just burning petroleum? This is what I don't know if people know, but I mean, you know where like so many materials come from, plastics? That's all coming from petroleum. So why are you burning that? Make something out of it instead. And I just want to make one more comment on the nuclear issue, because this is something that, you know, we get a lot of flack about. Nuclear is unsafe, I don't like it, and so forth. The simple fact of the matter is that the amount of energy in a nuclear reaction, a fusion reaction in particular, is 1 million times the energy in a chemical reaction. You can't ignore that.
Thank you, Jason. Paul? Oh, you're muted, Paul. Paul, you're muted, my friend.
I'm keeping my record clean of always starting out muted. I was very happy just to participate in the panel, which I think was coherent, almost had a, you could say, as Lynn used to say, a unity of effect. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Harley?
I'll be very brief. I think we ought to take to heart Helga's admonition that we have to get rid of geopolitics. Geopolitics is the identity politics of nations. It's how you manipulate nations to act against the interests of their own population. And we have to look at the world as one humanity, and we have to operate from a love of mankind. And that's something that is absolutely missing in most political discussion. But without it, you end up in a dog-eat-dog world, and that's exactly how the oligarchy is going to continue to maintain their control. So end geopolitics.
Thank you, Harley. I also just want to thank you, Harley Schlanger, for staying on till 4 a.m. your time. Thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate your presence here. So with that, we'll close panel 3. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panel for this very lively, important discussion. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. I wanted to just say immediately following this panel tomorrow, excuse me. Scratch that. Other announcement. But following what panel? Following some panel tomorrow, all interested singers will do a read-through of the Hate Dvorak setting of My Country 'Tis of Thee in the hallway outside, and we will have more information on that. Tomorrow's first panel, panel 4, will start at 9 a.m., so we'll see you bright and early.